The night I folded a thin army blanket across the back seat of my Buick and realized the company I'd built over 40 years now had a security guard who didn't recognize my face, I understood something about pride that it had taken me an entire lifetime to learn. I had always believed a man could measure his life by what he built with his hands. In my case it was a small manufacturing company outside Toledo, a squat brick building that smelled of cutting oil and hot steel, where fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the machines kept a steady rhythm like a mechanical heartbeat. We made simple things, industrial brackets, stamped plates, parts nobody noticed but everybody needed. The kind of work that doesn't make headlines but keeps bridges standing and tractors running. I started it in 1961 with one punch press, a borrowed welding rig, and a ledger book my wife bought me at Woolworth's. Every invoice in those early years was handwritten. I knew every bolt that came through the loading dock and every man who tightened one. Mornings began before sunrise, coffee steaming from foam cups balanced on oily tool benches while the radio muttered farm reports through static. By the mid-1980s we had 30 employees. That may not sound like much to some people, but to me it was a city. There was Carl who ran the press brake with hands like catcher's mitts. Louis in shipping who whistled Sinatra songs. And Maria in the office who could balance the books faster than most accountants. I walked that floor every morning the way a farmer walks his fields, checking, nodding, asking about kids and ball games and sick dogs. The machines would already be warm, the air smelling of steel dust and coffee, forklifts backing up with their sharp beeping echoes bouncing off the concrete walls. It wasn't just a business. It was a life. My son Daniel grew up inside that building. When he was small he used to sit on a wooden crate beside my desk and draw pictures of robots on scrap invoice paper while I took calls from suppliers. Sometimes he'd wander the shop floor holding my finger, staring wide-eyed at the sparks flying from welders. I remember thinking someday all of this would be his. That was the natural order of things. But the world changed faster than I did. By the time Daniel came back from business school in Chicago in the early 1990s, the way he looked at the company was different from the way I had always seen it. To him it wasn't a place. It was a system. "Dad, you're running this like it's still 1975, he told me one evening in the office. The overhead lights buzzed while snow drifted outside the window and the old radiator clanked beside my desk. He had spreadsheets. Forecasts. Charts showing growth curves and operational restructuring. Words like optimization. Outsourcing. Strategic partnerships. He wore slim suits and carried a leather briefcase that looked too new to belong in that oil-stained office. I remember feeling proud of him. And uneasy. "Things are changing," he said. "If we don't modernize, we'll get swallowed." I had survived recessions, steel shortages, interest rates that climbed so high in the 80s I thought the bank would take everything. But Daniel talked about things I didn't fully understand: global competition, automated supply chains, financial leverage. He wasn't wrong. Just, faster than the rhythm I knew. The conversation that started everything happened on a gray March afternoon. Machines hummed on the shop floor. Rain ticked against the office windows. Daniel sat across from me with a stack of documents neatly clipped together. "We should transition leadership," he said carefully. "You stay chairman. I handle operations." I studied the papers for a long time. 40 years of early mornings. 40 years of grease under my fingernails and invoices balanced late at night at the kitchen table while my wife slept down the hall. All distilled into signatures. Daniel leaned forward. "Dad, you deserve to rest." That word sat wrong in my chest. Rest. But I could see the future in his eyes, bright and impatient, the way mine must have looked once when I first bought that punch press. So I signed. At first nothing seemed different. I still walked the floor in the mornings. Still drank coffee with Carl and Louis. But slowly, quietly, the center of gravity shifted. Daniel hired consultants who wore crisp shirts and spoke in confident tones about efficiency. They installed computers in the office. New accounting software replaced Maria's handwritten ledgers. Meetings started happening that I wasn't invited to. Not deliberately, I don't think. Just, naturally. One day I noticed my office door had a frosted glass panel with the word "Founder" etched into it. Founder. A museum title. The machine still hummed, but the rhythm felt unfamiliar now, like hearing your own house through someone else's ears. Months passed. Decisions came faster. Loans were taken to expand production. Contracts were signed with suppliers overseas. The language in the office shifted toward growth targets and market positioning. I tried to keep up. But I was no longer steering the ship. Just watching it from the dock. Then came the morning Daniel asked me to stop coming to the floor so much. It confuses the chain of command, he said gently. I remember standing there with my old thermos in my hand, the smell of cutting oil drifting down the hallway, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. For the first time since 1961, I didn't know where I belonged inside my own building. So I started coming less. Then almost not at all. By the time the company's financial trouble began, quiet rumors about debt, missed payments, suppliers getting nervous, I was hearing about it secondhand. And one afternoon in late October, when the maple trees outside the parking lot had turned the color of rusted steel, I walked into the office and found a cardboard box already sitting on my desk. I stood there for a long time looking at that cardboard box, the kind you'd use to carry files from one room to another, the kind that never expects to hold 40 years of a man's life. Inside were the things that had slowly gathered around me over the decades. My old stapler with the chipped red paint. The brass letter opener shaped like a miniature sword. A faded photograph of Daniel at 6 years old wearing an oversized hard hat on the shop floor. Even my ledger from the first year was in there, the cover worn soft like old leather from years of hands opening it. Maria stood in the doorway. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. Finally she cleared her throat softly. Daniel thought it might be easier if I helped. Her eyes looked wet. I nodded like a man nods when a doctor explains something he already understands but doesn't want confirmed. Thank you, Maria. That was all I said. I carried the box out myself. The machines were running, the same steady mechanical rhythm they'd always had, but nobody stopped me as I walked across the floor. A few men looked up, confused, maybe unsure if they were supposed to say something. Carl raised his hand halfway before lowering it again. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Forklifts beeped in reverse. The smell of hot steel hung in the air. It was just another workday for everyone else. Outside, the wind had that sharp autumn bite that creeps through your coat no matter how thick it is. Leaves scraped across the asphalt parking lot like dry paper. I placed the box carefully on the passenger seat of my Buick. The same Buick I'd driven to the factory almost every morning since the early 70s. For a while I just sat there with the engine off, watching the building through the windshield. You'd think a moment like that would feel dramatic. But it didn't. It felt quiet. Like the end of a long conversation where neither person knows quite what to say anymore. The company struggled after that. I heard bits and pieces through old contacts. Expansion loans had stretched things too far. Overseas suppliers missed deadlines. Contracts slipped away. None of it happened overnight. Collapse rarely does. It's more like watching ice melt. You don't notice it until the water is already rising around your boots. I tried to keep busy. For a few months I told myself retirement was a gift. I fixed the loose steps on the back porch. Cleaned the garage. Took long walks around the neighborhood where I'd spent half my life leaving before dawn. But the silence of those mornings felt wrong. A man who has lived 40 years inside the rhythm of machines doesn't suddenly learn how to sit still. Then my wife passed that winter. A stroke. Quick and quiet. After the funeral the house felt too large. Every room held echoes. Daniel called often at first, his voice tight with worry about the company and guilt he never quite said out loud. We spoke politely. Like neighbors. I could hear the stress in his breathing. Eventually the calls became less frequent. I sold the house a year later. Too many ghosts in the kitchen. For a while I rented a small apartment over a hardware store. The landlord kept a coffee pot going downstairs that smelled strong enough to wake the dead. But savings drain faster than people realize. Especially when you're a proud old fool who refuses to tell anyone things aren't going well. By the following fall I found myself counting dollar bills at a gas station counter, trying to decide whether to buy fuel or groceries. It was around that time the Buick started becoming less of a car and more of a shelter. There's a grocery store outside Dayton with a wide parking lot and tall sodium lights that buzz all night long. The kind of place where truckers sometimes stop to sleep between drives. I parked near the far edge where nobody paid much attention. At night the lights turned everything amber, like the world was stuck in a permanent sunset. Shopping carts rattled across the asphalt when the wind blew. I'd crack the windows a little so the glass wouldn't fog, wrap myself in that old army blanket, and listen to the quiet hum of refrigeration units behind the store. You'd be surprised how quickly a man can adjust to that kind of life. What hurts isn't the cold. It's the remembering. The smell of coffee drifting from inside the store at dawn. The sound of early commuters starting their engines. All of it reminding you that once you had somewhere important to be. One morning frost coated the windshield so thick it looked like powdered sugar. I was scraping it with an old credit card when a pickup truck pulled into the empty space beside me. The engine shut off. A man stepped out. He stood there a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, studying me like someone trying to recall a name from long ago. Then he smiled. "Mr. Carter?" I blinked. The voice tugged at something in my memory. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Name's Miguel," he said. "You probably don't remember me." But I did. Not right away. It came in pieces. A skinny kid from the late 80s who used to sweep metal shavings off the shop floor after school. Quiet kid. Always watching the machines like he was trying to learn their language. "You taught me how to run the drill press," he said. And suddenly I saw it clearly. Miguel Alvarez. The kid who asked 100 questions. The kid who stayed late sometimes just to watch Carl bend steel plates. He leaned against his truck, smiling in a way that carried no judgment. "I've been looking for you," he said. "For me?" "Yeah. Heard things went sideways at the company." I didn't answer. Pride is a stubborn thing. Miguel nodded toward the Buick. "You staying here?" There are moments in life when telling the truth feels like stepping off a cliff. I hesitated. Then I shrugged. "For now." He looked at the frost on my windshield. The blanket folded in the back seat. And something changed in his expression, not pity. Recognition. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" "Shop's about 20 minutes from here." "Shop?" He grinned. "Metal fabrication." I laughed softly despite myself. "You running a shop now?" 10 years. That surprised me. "Small place," he added. "But we keep busy." I shook my head. "Miguel, I appreciate it, but..." He raised a hand. "Mr. Carter," he said gently, "you gave me my first real job. Taught me how machines think. Half the things I know about running a shop started with you." He pointed toward his truck. "So come see what you helped build." Something inside my chest loosened then. Not pride exactly. Maybe, relief. The drive was quiet. Morning light spread across frozen fields outside the city. Old barns leaned against the wind. Smoke curled from farmhouse chimneys. Miguel's shop sat behind a feed store on a gravel lot. Nothing fancy, just a long steel building with a roll-up door and a faded sign. Inside, the smell hit me immediately. Cutting oil. Hot metal. Coffee. Machines hummed under fluorescent lights. 3 men worked near a press brake. Sparks snapped from a welder's torch. The rhythm. That old familiar rhythm. Miguel clapped his hands once. "Guys," he called out, "this is Mr. Carter." They nodded respectfully. One of them wiped his hands on a rag and shook mine. Miguel led me toward a small office built from plywood and glass panels. A coffee maker gurgled on a filing cabinet. Then he said something I'll carry with me until the day I die. "Welcome to the family." No speeches. No pity. Just that. For the first time in a long while, I felt like a man again. I started slow. Sweeping floors at first, the same way Miguel once had. But soon enough I was showing the younger guys how to listen to the machines, the subtle vibration in a press when alignment is off, the way steel changes sound when it's about to crack. Miguel never treated me like an old relic. He treated me like experience. Months passed. Then years. The shop grew little by little. Another machine here. A new contract there. Sometimes at dawn we'd stand outside drinking coffee from foam cups while frost coated the gravel. The same kind of mornings I used to have decades earlier. Except now I understood something I hadn't known back then. A company isn't really a building. It's people. Daniel and I spoke again eventually. Carefully. Like 2 men rebuilding a bridge plank by plank. The company I started never fully recovered. It changed hands more than once after the debts caught up. But strangely, that doesn't hurt anymore. Because the truth is, losing everything stripped away the part of me that believed my worth was tied to a name on a building. What remained was simpler. Just a man who knows how to help other men make something useful out of steel. Some nights now, when the shop is quiet and the machines have cooled, I sit alone in the office with the lights low. I think about that parking lot. The sodium lights buzzing. The blanket in the back seat. And I realize something. That wasn't the end of my life. It was the moment everything unnecessary finally fell away. And what was left? Respect, work, people who stand beside you when things break, that turned out to be the real foundation all along.